I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. Today's episode is about moving beyond trauma, discovering true healing, ease, and vitality. Trauma is part of life, and we all experience it. Trauma doesn't just reside inside your mind. Much more importantly, it locks itself in other parts of your body. There are many therapeutic modalities, and Somatic Experiencing, SE, is one of them. It's a body-based therapy capable of healing the damage done to your nervous system by trauma. When left unresolved, that trauma continues to live there, impacting your life, your sense of safety, and your ability to experience joy in very real ways. Today's guest talks about how somatic experiencing has changed her life, so much so that now she's helping others to heal by blending talking, touch work, and movement. Ilene Smith is a somatic experiencing practitioner whose work incorporates attachment theory, touch work, movement, and therapeutic dialogue. Through healing trauma, her clients develop a safer and deeper relationship with themselves and increase their capacity for resilience and joy. Ilene holds a master's degree in mental health counseling and exercise psychology and is a certified professional coach through the GROW Training Institute. She completed the 3-year training program at the Somatic Experiencing Institute and has conducted research on somatic experiencing for eating disorder treatment. She has a brand new book out on body-based psychology called Moving Beyond Trauma. She holds workshops on somatic experiencing online and worldwide, and you can learn more about her work on her website, ilenesmith.com. There are a couple of episodes that I would like to mention that go very well with this one. Episode 203, Discovering Wholeness and Healing from Trauma with Dr. James Gordon. Episode 152, How Trauma Gets Stuck in Your Nervous System with Irene Lyon. And episode 113, Signs of Childhood Trauma in Adults with Laura Reagan. Excellent episodes, super packed with great info and tips, worth listening and re-listening. I would also like to recommend 2 phenomenal books. Number 1, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. And the second book is by Dr. Gabor Mate, When the Body Says No, Exploring the Stress-Disease Connection. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and follow me on Instagram. My username is authentic.parenting.podcast, where I will be giving away Ilene Smith's new book, Moving Beyond Trauma. For full episode show notes, ways to work with me, and additional free resources on parenting, visit authenticparenting.com. And if you need parenting support during these uncertain times, I invite you to join the Authentic Parenting Facebook group, an amazing, supportive, and warm space for conscious moms and dads just like you. And now, please enjoy this episode with Ilene Smith. Ilene, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, I just finished reading Moving Beyond Trauma, your book, The Roadmap to Healing from Your Past and Living with Ease and Vitality. Don't we all want to live with more vitality and energy and ease? Right? Especially
I think it's the way to go. I think it's the way to go. Yeah, it makes for a much richer life for sure.
So I'm really fascinated by your practice and your story as well. How did you get involved with somatic experiencing? Was it for your own healing first?
Well, I've had a very interesting journey getting here, and you just never know when you start out on a path where life is going to take you. In my early 40s, I went back to school to get a master's in mental health counseling. And I did my internship at an eating disorder clinic. And I knew from the beginning that I wanted to work with trauma, families, and eating disorders. And I was fortunate enough to wind up at this incredible eating disorder clinic. And it was a very interesting experience. It was the first time in my professional life and working for someone else that I felt I was in an environment that I felt so incredibly safe. And I talked to my supervisor was the founder of the clinic, and I kept talking to her about. I said, this is a really incredible experience, and I don't know what you're doing, but it's really quite amazing how this container of safety that you've built for the people that are working here and your interns. And which led to a conversation about somatic experiencing and her telling me that several of the clinicians were trained in this thing called somatic experiencing. And I got really curious about it. And she started teaching me about trauma and how the body, that trauma is not really about an event, it's about the energy that gets locked in our bodies, and that we need to create safety in order for us to really thrive and resolve the trauma. And so at a certain point, there was a somatic experiencing training in Phoenix where I live. And I went to the first training, and it was almost like I had been in talk therapy for so many years, and I still felt like my own nervous system had been was fairly dysregulated. And when I started learning about somatic experiencing and how the process to create repair from trauma, I felt like it was the missing link for myself. And as I moved through the training and I started using the techniques with clients, I just could not believe the results that I was getting. And so I just it's a 3-year training, and I continued through the training, and I was amazed. I'd also become a student. And as a student, I became a patient of the work. And it was a life changer for me. It changed how I was moving through life. I felt more connected to myself. I noticed that I wasn't as reactive to things in the world as I once had been. And hence, that was the beginning of it for me. And I'm a big fan of really believing that we need to have regulated nervous systems, and that we can't regulate our nervous systems until we resolve this trauma piece within our body.
Mm. When you were in that eating disorder clinic and you said you felt safe, first I want to ask you about that sense of safety. What was your experience before? Like, how did you know it was safe? What safety felt like? Did you have a turbulent childhood? Can you speak about that? How it felt and how different it was, and how come you learned that it was safe? What that safety felt like?
No, it's a good question. It felt as though it felt as though it was okay. Safety is really about being okay with being yourself. And so I was able to show up in a very authentic way. I knew that if I made a mistake, it wasn't the end of the world. I didn't feel criticized. I felt cared for, and I felt nurtured in every way. I felt nurtured to learn, and that people were really taking an interest in my learning and an interest in me. And so on every level, like, safety was about connection. It was about knowing that it was okay to really just show up and be myself.
Mm.
So I think that is, that's such an important part of building safety, to know that no matter what happens, that you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that, yeah.
And of course, it takes time for the wounded, traumatized person who hasn't felt safe or has felt unsafe more than safe to develop or to integrate that sense of safety, to trust in that, right? Did you have that experience, or it felt so good that you immediately relaxed into it? Like, I want to know about that.
Yeah, no, it was so warm and inviting that very quickly, within the first couple of days of being in this environment, I was in the right place. I knew that I was okay, no, even if I didn't know something, or I was going to make a mistake, that nothing was going to be detrimental to my experience there, that it was going to be every mistake will be used as a learning opportunity. And so it was the environment was just set up that way right away. And sure, I had been in other work environments where it wasn't like that. So this was sort of a new experience for me, but I was able to trust it pretty well when I got there.
Yeah, the reason I ask, I'm thinking about children who live in volatile households, right? And oftentimes you lose that sense of trust when you meet someone who is caring and nurturing.
Well, of course, because
right?
if you've grown up in an environment where there's a lack of safety, your nervous system is going to, when you go out there in the world and you start you start maturing, you're going to constantly sense danger when danger is not present.
Okay. Another thing I want you to quickly explain is Peter Levine's work. Obviously, it's the Somatic Experiencing. Not many people may know what it is. I would love for you to just tell what it is before we go into our interview deeply.
Sure. So Peter Levine had studied, he had asked this question. He was studying animals in the wild, and he was trying to figure out this one thing. How come animals in the wild do not get traumatized and human beings and domestic animals do? And what he ultimately recognized was that animals shake off the trauma, and they have what we call biological completion. So they shake the trauma through their body, and they are able to then discharge that energy that gets locked in the body when there's real or perceived threat. So Peter defines trauma as not about an event, but about the energy that gets locked in your body around real or perceived threat. And so he developed a therapeutic modality to help human beings have this biological completion in their therapeutic process. So in a sense, somatic experiencing there is a lot of talk in the therapy, but what the therapy is really doing is leading us to the real story that's in the body. And from that perspective, then we can start resolving the trauma. And in somatic experiencing, we're not going back and reliving the events. Like a lot of times in talk therapy, right, we tell the story over and over and over. With somatic experiencing, because the body is brought into the process, we then start creating a new relationship with our past, and one that helps us build more resilience and vitality in our systems.
May I ask you, how was your experience with somatic experiencing when you started your healing process? I would love to know firsthand how it worked for you personally, because this is something I have considered myself. And I have looked in my area for SE practitioners and all of that. I'm also thinking of the listener. We have talked about this stuff on the podcast, but I would love for you, if you're open to it, and as much as you would like to share, how does it look like, on the body level when you start to heal, or were there different phases, what shows up and stuff like that?
So I'm going to answer the first part of that. You asked me about my own personal story and if I'm willing to share. And the answer is absolutely. I had spent most of my adult life in talk therapy, and yet still at age 40, after being in therapy for probably solid 15 years, I had I had a history of eating disorders, and a lot of my behaviors had changed. But yet underneath it all, it felt like it was more of a management issue than a lifestyle. And so I was still anxious, and I still very easily felt dysregulated. so it was almost as though my body, while it might have looked like on the outside that everything was good, inside it was like the tectonic plates of my nervous system were just constantly shifting. And so when I got to the somatic experiencing work and I started bringing the body into the process, which is what it does, and my body started becoming that safe container for me, my nervous system was able to create more balance. So all of the things that I felt like I was managing around my eating disorder behaviors organically just started to melt away. Like they just started to become non-issues for me. My system, I was less reactive to people, and my system just felt less agitated. And so I know the work works. It's powerful, and in some ways it almost feels at times when you're in the therapeutic process, it's so organic, it doesn't even feel like it's happening. And I think it really does create deeper and everlasting changes.
When you say it doesn't seem like it's happening, can you say more about that?
Because it's less of this heady cognitive process, and it's more about connecting to the sensory experiences in your body. And somatic experiences really teaches you how to move through your experiences and be able to tolerate the discomfort that you might feel moving through experiences, versus what we tend to do in talk therapy is, we tend to try to solve for the why something's happening. And what somatic experience is really about is about being with what we're experiencing in the present moment. It's about teaching you how to be your own observer and being okay in that role, and not trying to solve the problem.
Yeah, you mentioned in your book that you were this very active, physically active person, exercising, fitness type of stuff, and always very busy, right? Very active. I'm wondering what it felt like when you slowed down. How did you feel that you were dysregulated, and how did dysregulation manifest or show up? And were you scared at first of the discomfort?
So let me just kind of start with this big idea. For me, part of my eating disorder was I was an over-exerciser, and I used exercise as a way to give me relief from all the discomfort that I was constantly feeling. So exercise was not healthy for me. It was an overused overused it as a way. It was as a coping mechanism. So I had to, so what it did for my nervous system, it kept my nervous system like in a hyperactive state at all times. So yeah, slowing it down was really a process. It wasn't like one day I just put the brake on and said, I have to do this. I had to slowly wean off the exercise at that intensity in order for me to be able to start rebalancing how my nervous system was functioning. So yeah, it took several years, and it was very challenging, and it was very uncomfortable. But I knew what I was doing was not going to get me what I wanted, which was to be calmer and more grounded and more centered.
And how about now, when things happen in life, there is anxiety, fear, triggers, right? Stuff happens in life. I'm sure you're very aware. And how do you manage this stuff? How do you attend to your own feelings and, move through them in your body?
Well, I would say I'm much better today than I ever have. Part of the process of somatic experiencing, you really do learn how to be your own observer. And so observing slows us down, and it allows us to be present. And in the somatic experiencing process, because you're building your body as a safe container, you're building more resilience to be able to tolerate distress in your system. So today I would say that it takes a lot more for me to get dysregulated. I'm just able to kind of navigate things with a lot more ease and fluidity.
Well, that's a huge plus.
Huge victory.
Huge victory.
It's a place I never thought that I didn't even know was possible for me. But, in a fairly short period of time, after 15 years in talk therapy, I'd say after a couple of years of somatic experiencing, my whole system just felt and looked different.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So do you do regular tune-ups for yourself? How do you remain balanced in your nervous system? Do you do anything at all? I'm curious.
So, and I talk about this piece in the book. It's, I think, towards the end of the book. I talk about this idea of what I call a healing lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And in a healing lifestyle, it's about living your life in a certain way. So for me, there are certain things that I know keep me in my body to keep me regulated, like my morning routine. Like every morning after I have my coffee, I take out a foam roller. And I work with the fascia, which is the tissue, that big sheath of tissue over your body, because that helps it's one of the ways to keep me in my body, and it's a way to regulate the nervous system. I have a regular yoga practice and meditation practice, and these things all are part of what I call a healing lifestyle. And they're just what I do now. It's not like they're effortless at this point, because it's part of what I know keeps me regulated.
I see. And what do you see that works for your patients, for your clients? I don't know how you call them. What kind of patterns have you observed in people that go from dysregulated to regulated? Again, this is all very interesting, right? Everybody's so different.
Yeah, that's the thing. Everyone is so different.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, part of what I do in my work is I guide people to being able to piece together, and it's part of the work in the book. The book is sort of a workbook to start seeing how their own nervous system's functioning. And then we create toolboxes for clients to be able to use and manage and explore and get curious about what works for them and what doesn't, because everyone has different things that they're going to resonate and connect with. So it's really about helping them explore that part of themselves.
Mm. I am very curious to hear you speak about people who might be experiencing the freeze response, who from outside look all right, but internally things are not all right, right? They're frozen. The freeze
Yes.
response is predominantly activated. What can you teach us about this? The reason I'm asking is no, forget the reason I'm asking this. Just go ahead. Yes, I'll ask you a different question about it.
Okay, sure. So, well, first, let me maybe just help the listeners understand that the basic physiology of survival. So, we've all heard of fight or flight, but if fight or flight doesn't work, our bodies will go into freeze. And so, fight and flight and freeze are all meant for acute experiences, right? We're not meant to get stuck in these survival states. But if fight or flight doesn't work, our bodies then will say, oh my God, I think I'm about to die. And I have to shut down and disconnect from my body so that I don't feel the pain I'm about to experience. So that freeze response can look like like we hear, you've heard the term a deer in headlights.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what a freeze is, right? The deer knows it's about to get struck, and it freezes. It basically shuts its entire system down. And so a lot of times we see this with people that have had chronic stress in their childhoods, where they had no capacity to fight or flight, right? They're young kids, they're trapped, they have no ability to defend themselves. And in order for them to survive, they just completely shut down. And so that young child now turns into an adult that looks like this totally mellow human being. But what they've really done is they're just staying in that survival state of freeze. And so, part of the work with a client like that is to start helping them reattach to themselves and be able, that's usually a big dissociation piece. So it's about teaching them how to bring themselves back to themselves so that they can move out of that freeze state. And often what happens when you take someone out of the freeze state, it's like reverse engineering. They'll start, their fight or flight instincts will start coming back online. It's pretty powerful to watch. Yeah, they'll start being able to defend themselves and use their voice and not tolerate being in situations that they don't want to be in.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Recently, I had what it looked like a panic attack, some kind of anxiety attack, I'm going to say. And from it, I even felt more fear that I'm going to die, I'm going to pass out, right? It's sort of like snowballed. And what I was trying to be in my body, trust me, I know that I can tolerate the discomfort and all of that. And I've always been good with that kind of stuff, being with my body, letting the emotion move and stuff like that. But this felt very different. And I was wondering, the first thought that came to me, and this is the perks of learning on this podcast, too many things, is like, wow, I wonder if I have this freeze response in me. I wonder what do I have to do to get out of this? I don't want to be stuck in this response. How do I know if I have the freeze response?
Well, it sounds like you went into a panic. Mm-hmm. And then I'm not sure, like, what happened after you felt all that panic and you thought you were going to die. Did you feel like you started hovering and dissociating from your body?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your body was just saying, okay, fight or flight's not working here. And you might have gone into a freeze response, but somehow or other you brought yourself out of it.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't me. And also to be fair, here is what happened. I was recently diagnosed with very, very low iron. And I was warned not to walk alone, not to go places. And, with this whole coronavirus, I can't even go to the doctor and things like that. So I was worried about that was the first thing. And I almost fainted in the store. And just the thought and the fear of passing out somewhere was big enough, right? And I knew there is this underlying health thing, but it shows up out of nowhere. It happened a few times lately.
Yeah. And so somewhere maybe in something just to think about is, there's something that is not making you feel safe right now. And it could be, has this happened all since the coronavirus started or before?
Well, it was before and while this is happening. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe there's just the knowing that, like, you can't go to the doctor, or, we're not as safe in general right now. We're not, going to a doctor doesn't feel safe because we're all scared of being in an office with other sick people. And so, there could be so many different things that are triggering this response right now. And it might be something from historically that is not allowing you to feel fully safe now. Getting diagnosed with iron might be a triggering event for something from your past. I don't know enough.
Yeah.
But it's just something to think about that there might be some underlying trauma that hasn't been resolved around being sick.
Yeah. And my response is, I think usually, and I don't want to turn this into a therapy about myself, but it might
it's always good to use ourselves as case studies, though, for sure.
It might be useful to the listener that I always thought my default response is always fight, but this freeze is something new. I felt the disassociation, and it's really scary.
Yeah, it's because especially if you're not used to that experience, like, I think someone that's always dissociated kind of likes it, but if you're used to being able to go into that fight response, and right now that's not happening for you, it's probably just going to exacerbate all of something deeper in your system. And I wonder if there's something from earlier on that hasn't been resolved. That would be, like, without knowing enough, that might be something to think about.
I will. There's a few ideas already I have. Thank you. This was very helpful, very insightful. I appreciate that. In your book, you have, I believe, 6 assessments, correct?
Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about a few of them, what they serve, why did you come up with assessments in the first place?
Sure. So when I set out to write this book, and this book was really the idea behind the book was to really be able to educate and empower a reader to be able to see that trauma needs to get resolved beyond the talking, and that it's really about teaching our nervous system something new, and about regulation. And I felt like if the reader had a roadmap to begin to understand how their own system was functioning, we can then start bringing curiosity and awareness and more observation to the experience of the reader. And so hence I set out with these assessments to help create really a how-to and allow for the reader to better understand their own functioning. So like the first assessment in the book is what I call a trauma sensitivity assessment. And it's to help the reader see to what degree, not how traumatized someone is, but to what degree their past traumas are impacting the way they're behaving and functioning today. And this gives someone a kind of a benchmark to start seeing how much really needs to get resolved. So, and one of the things I like about the assessment is you can go back and take it a year later or 6 months later and see your progress. And then the other 5 assessments are about helping the reader to see, like, are they fight, flight, or freeze dominant? Let's see and to also be able to look at, like, these are your survival instincts, okay? And so what might have worked at one point in your life may not be working for you today. So it's the idea is to be able to help the reader look at all aspects of how their nervous system is functioning.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I just want to mention that again, right? So fight, flight, freeze. Our dominant response can change throughout life.
Yeah, and I think that and also to what degree do we use these? But yeah, I mean, they do change, and different situations might create a different trauma response. A different survival response. It just depends on where someone is in their process and what the triggering event might be. But I think most of us do have, one of the 3 tend to be more dominant in when we feel threatened.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to see the fighters, the flighters, or the fleers. It's pretty easy to, those 2 I think are easy to see, right? Because if you're fighting with someone, they're fighting back. Well, that's obvious. Or if something happens threatening in their life, they're reactive, they're angry, they have an outburst, lashing out. That's kind of, it's right there. Flight is easy to see too. The withdrawal, the isolation, they leave the house when there is a fight. I was wondering if you could speak about those patterns a little bit so that the person who is listening may sort of identify themselves. And the freeze, of course, we talked about it already. You disassociate, right? You seem all right, but not really.
Right. Well, I mean, like, fight, we tend to see people in fight response. They will be generally more overreactive to situations. And a lot of times when someone, and I've seen this happen, many times, where somebody reacts to you in a very hostile way for what looks like no apparent reason, but what is happening for that person because something is triggering for them, and they essentially they're not present. They're actually experiencing what's happening in the present as a threat from something that happened in the past, because trauma has no sense of space or time. And so like a perfect example might be like a war veteran, guy who comes home from war and he hears the car muffler, all right, and he goes into like, total fight mode. And defensive mode, because his experience of that noise has nothing to do with the actual car muffler noise. It has to do with maybe an explosion that he experienced and maybe had some trauma around.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And also, I was just having some kind of argument with someone, and their fight response was overly verbose, not really like yelling and screaming type of response, but barrage of texts or just very critical, very verbose. I thought to myself,
defensive, in a sense, defensive.
In a sense defensive, but again, it's
attacking.
It's attacking, right? It's a form of attack, even though the person doesn't think so themselves.
No, because they're not present. They're not able to see the reality of a situation. They're somewhere in the time warp and something that happened in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to the person on the other side of it, it makes no sense. It's like, why is this person being so reactive? But to the person that's in it, they're experiencing danger and threat when it may not be there.
How can I, for example, help that person to come into the present moment if we're having this, let's say, conversation that turns into a mild argument? Is there anything I can do to make that person?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I talk a lot about this with parents, because the more regulated and the safer you can make that other person feel, the better. And so it's like the piece is, when someone else is dysregulated, the more you can use a calm, gentle, melodic voice and stay in that calm space, you're going to help bring them down and to like let them know it's okay. But when we get into a defensive posture, when someone's coming at us like that, all it does is create more dysregulation. It's like what you see with parents that start yelling at their kids that are dysregulated. It doesn't help. So it's the same thing.
Yes.
But part of that takes the person on the receiving side, and I say this also with parents, is like your job is safety, but you have to attend to yourself so you can do a better job of attuning to your little people. And you have to help, you can help them build resources, let them know that it's okay, that you're a safe person, because that's going to help create more resilience. It's about really teaching the other person that this is not a dangerous situation.
So what can you say about the flight response? How it might look like for different people?
Well, it's sort of, a lot of time when people have a flight response, they'll cut the other person off. They'll shut them down. They won't talk to them. They'll give them the silent treatment, or they'll just avoid a situation. That tends to be more flight.
Mm-hmm. Good. This is all good. This is all good stuff. If only we can practice.
Well, that's why it's really important. It's an interesting point. If we can practice attuning to ourselves, we can do a much better job attending to other people.
How can someone cultivate daily practices of attuning and connecting to themselves on this embodied way?
Well, it's a good question. In the book, I actually give a series of exercises that people can use to start this healing process. And these exercises, there's everything in there in the book, from breath work to learning how to orient to your environment, to building a sensory toolbox. What else do I have in the book? I'm just kind of thumbing through. Some self-soothing exercises like self-hugs. And, there's many different ways you can do it. It's just a matter of taking a few minutes every day to start that process.
Can I ask you more than about the sensory toolbox?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the sensory toolbox is it's something that I really like, and I do it with clients. it basically, if we can get connected to our senses, right, we can get more connected to our body. So I invite people to take things that are tactile, different textures. If they're tactile, like I'm a very tactile person, I like to have something in my hand. The other ways you can do it is by using essential oils. Maybe it's finding a great, putting together a playlist that you really connect with, and being able, or looking at beautiful things. So everyone has different senses that they feel more connected with.
Mm-hmm.
So I invite my clients to pull together this sensory toolbox, and it's just really a bunch of sensory strategies that will help build and support a healthy sensory system. Because when trauma strikes, like our ability to accurately sense how we feel inside our bodies and in the world is often skewed.
Mm.
So this is a way to connect more deeply with yourself.
Mm.
And
And not in the moment when you're triggered or agitated, correct?
No, it's a great to use it while you're triggered or agitated, because it's going to bring you back into more connection with yourself and your body.
Okay.
And it's really helpful for to help the central nervous system process, information more accurately in the body. Because remember, every emotion has a sensation. So we have to get more connected to our sensory experiences. And because the more accurate we can be with our sensory experiences, the more accurately we can sense and feel emotion.
Mm. Yeah. What's the hardest emotion for you personally?
I think sadness.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
I think sadness. I think I've spent so much of my childhood feeling sad, and that, you talk about a part of yourself, like, and so in order for me to survive, I had to dissociate from that. So a big part of my work in my own healing journey was being able to allow myself to feel a full range of emotions. And sadness has been a hard one for me. I mean, even, I talk about this in the book. I lost my husband about 4 years ago. And it was an interesting exercise in all the somatic work that I had done, because, I really, for the first time in my life, I really allowed myself to be with the sadness, and I invited it in. I wasn't scared of it. So I was able to see how deeply the work had really impacted my range of emotion and my ability to sense myself.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Yeah, it was, the somatic work was really life-changing for me. And I have so many clients that have been through so many other treatment modalities, and we get to some incredible work so quickly with the SE process.
No, I know. When you do something on a body level, it's just so powerful. Even when you get a massage or a healing touch, what can you say about touch? You write about that in the book too.
Yeah, touch is so powerful. So much of our memory is held in our tissue, right? Especially pre-verbal. And so what I know and what I see with clients is that when we start touching into their bodies, and part of my practice is touch work, things change on a much deeper and a more cellular level than I see in even the other part of SE work. Like you've heard the saying, the issues are in the tissues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like, think about a baby, right? All the pre-verbal. How does a baby get regulated? Like the mom is holding, right? And so what does that do? It creates a safe container for the baby. And so we still need that as adults.
Any interesting or case studies or stories, not in great detail, but what have you witnessed when you touch people, either during the first session or throughout? Any interesting case study that you can share that was completely...
Oh yeah, I've seen all sorts of amazing things happen when I get someone on the table. But I think one of the most fascinating experiences that I had with a client was we'd started doing some touch work and we got into her own birth. And so we moved through her entire birthing process. And there's this heat and shaking and tears that all happened, while she was on the table. And, what was most fascinating is that her relationship with herself changed dramatically. And with her mom had dramatically changed after that session.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it was pretty powerful. I mean, the heat that was coming out of her body and the tears and the shaking. And that's usually how we get biological completion, is through heat, shaking, and tears. So anytime I have a session with someone where there's a lot of that, I know that they're going to be really tired, and I know that some good work has been done.
Wow. So heat and shaking
and tears, yeah, is how we release trauma from the body.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So how is it for you to witness it all? Do you get, do you cry? Do you get tears? How does it move you emotionally?
I mean, it moves me, but my job is to hold a safe space for the client. Because of my own self-care and my ability to attend to someone, to attend to myself, I'm able to attune to someone else's needs without merging with them.
Do you feel anything afterwards when you go home? Let's say you had a big session, or a few sessions during the day, and you go home, what it's like for you?
Again, I think because I've done a lot of work, for me, it's more of an empowering and joyful experience to know that I've facilitated some change for another individual.
So when you touch someone, energetically, I'm curious, do you speak with them? Can you describe this experience a little more, or am I being too nosy here? I'm very curious.
No. I mean, no. With the touch work, I have someone on the table, and I'm feeling things throughout their body, and we might have some conversation. We may not. I'm often trying to bring awareness to them and to their body as things are happening or as I'm feeling them. And so every session is different, and every individual is going to release the trauma differently.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating part of the process because there's so much work that gets done through touch.
Yeah, I know we humans are just built for touch, but we're also starved for touch.
Yeah, very much so. And especially when there's been a history of trauma, there's generally it's needed even more so.
Yeah, and especially with that, you don't, and sometimes the touch could be the source of trauma, right? Let's say,
right. And with a client like that, you're not gonna start out, it's touch, getting to the touch work with a client. It's not something, you don't just put someone on the table. You really have to make sure that there's safety between you and that person. And especially if there's been a trauma history and there's been physical or sexual abuse, you have to be extra sensitive. I have many clients, especially eating disordered clients, that we never, it may take years to get to touch work. And some of them I have, you can't, it doesn't happen.
I recently, I was speaking with someone who mentions that she really, really craves touch, and it's big for her. She's just seeking it, and she's needing it. Do you think it's something that is inside her that says you're not safe? What could this be? I'm wondering.
She might just really need to have the physical contact. I mean, my guess is that she's craving it because she didn't have enough. I mean, I don't know enough to really say, but I would guess if someone's craving it, they might not have had enough.
And anything you would like to add to this, or what would you like me to ask that we didn't cover, sort of to stay in the same vein?
Yeah, I think I think what I'd really like people to take away from this is that healing is possible, and it's not your fault that you are where you are today if you've had a trauma history. A lot of times we use whatever coping strategies that are going to work to help us survive. And so the same, and our bodies know what they need to help us survive. But I think the big thing that I really want people to understand is that same body that helped you survive is the same body that can ultimately help you thrive in your life. And that it is at any level, healing is really possible. So it's just, I think that I want people to walk away from this with some hope and with the knowing that with the right facilitator, your life can be richer and more connected and more present and wonderful. But you have to just be a willing participant.
Mm. What does authenticity mean to you personally? What does it mean to live an authentic life?
It's such a good question. For me, it's about being able for my inner voice and my outer behaviors to be aligned, so that I'm living what I call in my truth, and not living in fear that my truth is going to create reactivity for other people.
Mm. And Ilene, where can the listener find you online and get hold of your social media links and your book and your website?
So my website is ilenesmith.com, and Ilene is Ilene. Smith is Smith. My Instagram is Ilene Smith Healing, and my Facebook, I think, is Ilene Smith Trauma Healing.
Great. Well, I want to thank you, Ilene, for joining me today. It was pretty fascinating. As I said, I'm really widely curious to do the somatic experiencing on myself. I have to find a practitioner because I really want to do this. And we can talk about how I can find someone in my area. So thank you so much for being here today and the work that you do, helping so many people heal from trauma and live truly joyful, happy, and free lives.
Well, thank you for having me. This was really wonderful.